Hello and welcome to Talk Landscape. My name is Andrea and I will be your host for today's conversation. So get comfortable, say hi in the chat, tell us where you're watching from. I'm currently joining live from Bonn, Germany at the GLF headquarters here, and we have a very special episode. This is episode 6 of Talk Landscape. And I'm so excited to bring this conversation to all of you and bring you into this conversation about various interconnected crises that are affecting our daily lives and the ways that communities and world leaders and youth and the global community is finding to tackle these interconnected crises of land degradation, biodiversity loss, and climate change, extreme weather events, and global warming. Today, we're going to not only go into what we have achieved so far in terms of negotiations at this high-level United Nations Climate Conference, but also how these negotiations feed into the daily lives of communities who are directly being affected by the effects of these crises. Not only that, we also want to see what are the ways in which the lived experiences and the realities of farmers, of youth, of activists can feed into these conversations, into these high-level negotiations that might sometimes feel like they're happening in another planet. So we're bringing everything together, bringing your questions, bringing your comments on how we can bridge the gap between high-level talks, climate negotiations, and real life, on-the-ground action. I am excited to welcome our first guest of today, Alokita Jha, who is joining us from Berlin, Germany, but is originally from India. Alokita, welcome to Talk Landscape. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for the nice introduction. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. If you could speak up a little bit, it would be much appreciated. And then we get started. I also want to encourage everyone in the chat to send in their comments, their questions. I'll be looking at them. We'll be showing them on stream from time to time, and we'll be taking them into account for this Talk Landscape. So Alokita, let me just dive into my first question to you. You just came out of a focused discussion on implementation for financial mechanisms for loss and damage. And I know everyone, that sounds very high level, very technical. But first, I wanted to ask you, Alokita, how does the three-pronged crisis of biodiversity loss, land degradation, and climate change actually affect communities on the ground from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Andrea. Thank you for asking that. Yeah, so I was part of a recently meeting on Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. So it was a very technical meeting at the first place. But these are the meetings which actually decide the future of the community at the local level who are going to be impacted by the effects of the climate change. But it is through the community that these texts or the policy are to be transformed. So these three conventions are very interlinked and very much affect the life of and livelihoods of the people at the local level, because when we talk about land degradation or the biodiversity degradation, it's very much interlinked with how a farmer is living in a community at the local level, and how the agriculture or the climate change or change in the rainfall pattern is going to affect the production of the crop or the environment in the vicinity of a particular farmer or the community. And then what are the mechanisms which are at the top level which are going to protect them from these changes? Are there mechanisms related to finance? Are there something going to be in the future to help them navigate these situations? So is there some kind of buffer, some kind of changes at the policy level which are going to protect them? So yeah, so problem exists. The problem is very much visible, especially in the developing and the underdeveloped country, where farmers are already affected by the changing climatic patterns, heat, rainfall, and then the effect of what is happening at the top level. So this is interlinked. Yeah.
Thank you for this overview, Alokita, of how these crises are directly affecting farmers in this case, But I also want to look at the effects on um, other communities in specifically the Latin American region. So for that, I would like to bring in our next guest, Benjamin Carvajal, who is the founder of the NGO 1.5. Benjamin, if I am not mistaken, you're joining us from Chile.
Yeah, exactly, from Chile.
Wonderful. Thanks for being here on this talk landscape. So Benjamin, can you tell us a little bit what are the main impacts of these three interconnected crises of biodiversity loss, of climate change, of land degradation, most felt in Latin America? Of course, from your perspective, you are an expert in just energy transition and in youth empowerment. So, what can you tell us? Where have you seen the most the highlighted effects of these three crises in Latin America?
Perfect. Well, it's not easy to start to talk about that, actually.
I don't expect it to be easy.
Yeah, that's completely true. Well, the first thing is like these conventions are completely related to Latin America, to our region, not just because everything started in Rio, in Brazil, that is part of Latin America, also because when we talk about this topic, these topics are completely related to biodiversity. 40% of the global biodiversity are in Latin America, but also our region is one of the most affected loss of biodiversity. Then on climate change, Latin America just represent 8% of the GHG emissions, 8%, but it is completely affected by the diverse impacts of the global warming, right? And in terms of the desertification, well, not all countries are suffering this gap or this lack of water or the effect of the water cycle. But if we see, for example, in case of Chile, Chile is one of the most affected countries in the world, not just in the region, in the world by the drought. So even when it's a region that it is not a protagonist or like the main actor of this crisis, is one of the most affected. So from that perspective, it is clear to see, okay, what does it mean? So the climate justice or this diverse justice when you don't have like the main responsibility, but you are one of the most affected region. So from that point, it's also quite important to say, okay, last year we have the cup of the biodiversity convention here in Latin America and in Colombia, and that was quite like, how can I say, like it was like quite, it's not good the word, but it was like nice to see a talk when the Latin America was the center. And actually, this year, after 11 years, we're gonna have again the UNFCCC convention, the cup of climate change, on climate change. So the idea is also to bring together and to put at the center not just the mission, also people, ecosystem, and understand that the biodiversity, climate change, and desertification are like completely connected, are, and those are not like three different crises that the world say, okay, I'm gonna affect that in on climate change and then the biodiversity. We have to see everything as a like a very strong network, as an ecosystem, as it is. So that is our idea of the to put that topic, those topic actually, in the COP 30. And fortunately, the COP 30 presidency have been quite clear and to put that in the center of the climate negotiation.
Benjamin, you mentioned an alarming cipher for just how little emissions the Latin American region is responsible for. So 8% of greenhouse gas emissions are actually coming from Latin America. And I'm sure the case would be the same with regions in Africa and Asia Pacific. So, Alakita, could you tell us more if there is this disparity in the Asia Pacific region, and how do you deal with this disparity when it comes to allocating financial mechanisms or allocating finance for tackling loss and damage in the region?
So there is a clear-cut disparity. This is a very important point for by Benjamin in the previous discussion, that disparity is very much visible at the local level, especially. So within the Asia, it's very diverse in nature. There are some countries which are near to the ocean, and there are some countries who are at the in the different areas. But the level of changes in these regions are very varied. Who is impacted in different region is also dependent on where we are living as a person, especially young people and who are at the transition. So yes, and we can see this disparity very clearly with the community who have no or zero inclusion in these climate change effects, who have not contributed to the greenhouse gas emissions, but who are going to impact in the future, especially the communities who are living in the near the sea or the ocean. They are the one who are going to be impacted very early, like the impact is clearly visible even now, especially for the youth who are facing the impact, not just the tangible impact of loss and damage, but also the impact related to mental health or non-economic loss and damage, which is going to impact the future of their education, their health, and also how are they growing in the coming days. They already have seen the climate change happening around them, and so yeah, so the impact is multi-pronged, and but there is a large gap where they should actually get the funds, and who for whom the fund is actually going to be taken. So these things have to be taken in consideration, especially when we are talking related to finance mechanisms. So even as we as a youth advocate, when we advocate in these climate conferences, we are always stressing for the most vulnerable community and youth who have not at all contributed to these impact, but they are the ones who are going to the large brunt of the impact that is going to happen in the future.
Sorry, now I want to go over to Benjamin, because if I'm not mistaken, Benjamin, you've attended at least 5 of the previous COPs.
Yeah, you're right. That's
Okay.
yeah.
Wow, that's yeah. I think you're the veteran here. How do these negotiations? How accessible are they? Do you feel like, how was your participation joining these, and how do these feed into discussions in the region and in your work and in your communities?
Well, I can talk just for the COP on climate change, okay?
Yeah.
Because I attended since the first one was COP 25, actually, under the Chilean presidency in 2019, that we didn't have actually in Chile, and that we missed like a big opportunity. But something that, well, if we see just the data of attendees of these conferences, we can see that, for example, in 2019 for the COP 25, the conference received around 27K attendees. Then in the COP 26 in Glasgow, in UK, there were like around 50K. Then for COP 27, it was around 60K, if I am not wrong. Then COP 28, well, we did a very big step, and then it was like around 100K people that attended, that were in Dubai. That was like also crazy. But then in COP 29, that actually when it was not like a big COP and it was really difficult to access in terms of like accommodation costs, the number of attendees were around like 70K or something like that, like 60K people. So if we see just the numbers, it's like, okay, more people now are interested, and then more people go to COP, right? But then, if we see the categories of the attendees, we can see that there are more like lobbyists, like fossil fuel company lobbyists. Actually, it is the second biggest delegation. It was the second biggest delegation after the Brazil delegation, that is always the biggest. Um, so it's like, okay, there are even more fossil fuel oil representatives than country. And the countries at the end are the people that negotiate or should be like more like present on this cup. So um, it is not easy to say, okay, we are having this kind of climate negotiation, climate talks, when we have a big presence of oil company that at the end is like the thing that like the problem that we want to fix, right? But in terms of like accessible, well, we have advanced. I love to I like to be an optimist. I think that we have to give like very good like steps in terms of accessibility. Now we have more capacity programs. Now we talk more about this than, for example, in 2019. We had these capacity programs in different languages, not just in English, it also in Portuguese and Spanish. Actually, this year we had a COP30 Academy when we explained everything about COP. And it was like in a course that we had like more than 2,200 participants. It was a free course online with a very known technical institute in Argentina, and that was like a very good like thing to see. Okay, there is a big interest actually in the population in Latin America that want to understand what is happening, what is going to happen actually now in Brazil, right? So the accessibility, of course, have increased for sure, but it is not still in that ideal point. So we have to guarantee that, and we can do it from different perspectives. We can like pressure our governments, our like international institution to bring more young people to this cup, more women, more indigenous people, indigenous representatives, because it's quite clear that we need to put those voices of the most affected people on the center of the discussion. The political situation now in the world is not easy. So, from my perspective, of course, now the climate negotiations are a level of point that are quite technical, but we also have to remember that we are talking about ecosystem from like lives people. So it's like every decision that we make or we don't make in those rooms is like it's gonna reflect or it's gonna like be affected or not affected to people.
Now, Benjamin, you mentioned the steady increase in attendees, which I get that doesn't mean necessarily growing diversity of voices, right? But
Yeah, yeah, but there are more young people actually now, because when I attended the COP25, actually we were like around, I don't know, we always remember that we have a photo of different Latin America's representative young people, and we were
mhm.
like around 50, but now I cannot even like recognize everyone. Probably there are more like 200, right? So that's very good, because in COP26, okay, there were like probably like some hundreds, but now there are like maybe 300, 400 of young people from Latin America that are attending that COP. That's cool, because we are like including more diversity, more reality of the region, and it is not like in just very small like sector or like group of people that talk very technical question. We have to increase like to keep like to make bigger that circle, that bubble. So that I think that we have like advanced on that, but we have still many things to do it.
Absolutely. Now, I want to ask Alokita if you feel like by following in whichever way, by following these negotiations, do you feel like they're tackling the three the three crises in an interconnected way, are there any wins that you feel like have been made towards actually finding synergies and tackling the crisis of biodiversity loss, of climate change, and land use in an interconnected way?
Yes, so I can talk in context of what is being discussed for the loss and damage finance. I would say that it has a vision, and the entire technical discussions around how finance would be distributed to the local communities is more inclusive in nature, and also has the point where all three things are taken together, and how it is more interconnected to each other, especially when there are committees or there are experts who are talking about this or who are building the policies and frameworks. They discuss it based on how it is connected land, biodiversity, and also the climate change, and then how to take all these things together, and then how can finance flow in such context. So in context of loss and damage finance, it is taking the synergies between three sectors, and considering these three perspectives together. But in context of other discussions, I'm a little skeptical in nature, because I think it also largely depends on what kind of groups are advocating for a particular policy text, or for a particular convention within the entire finance discussion. For loss and damage finance, for it's the multiple groups who are part of this discussion: youth, NGO communities, and there are other observer groups who have been pushing it to make it more inclusive. But of course, there's a lot that needs to be done. So yeah, so it depends largely on who is advocating for it, who is getting the space within this discussion, so as to make it more interconnected, more synergized. And that's why I always say that people are generally not very hopeful for these COP discussions, but ultimately these are the places where the future is going to be decided, and it has to be very inclusive in approach, taking all the aspects of society, all kind of people who are affected by it, who can actually tell these policymakers to include the various perspective, because otherwise at the top level it's always things that seen in silos, but who are affected by such impact, they know how things are not to be taken in silos, they have to be taken together, and communities have to be there to push for that, and when communities are there, then decisions are taken together. Otherwise it's mostly top down and considered not together.
Now, I want to also ask a question to our audience watching. Please chime in the chat. Do you think that the high-level talks like the United Nations Climate Change Conference, or the biodiversity, or the UNCCD COPs can actually affect communities on the ground? Like, have you seen any real impacts from these negotiations? That's one question that I want to ask to the audience. And I also want to ask back to you, Alokita, and also if anyone in the chat wants to chime in. So you mentioned, Alokita, that of course the effects and the decisions can be felt in a holistic way, right, on the communities. Like the effects of climate change do not differentiate on who they affect, obviously. So how do you what are some ways or some mechanisms that you feel are already working in bringing the voices of communities on the ground to these high-level talks, to the world leaders that are ultimately taking this decision? How do we reverse the flow of information, of decision-making, rather than going from top down, from the bottom up? What are some hopes or some pathways that you can point us towards too?
So I can start with my experience of
Of
leading
course.
a group of youth, and then including them in this discussion, and how was that possible, so to have the more inclusive participation of them in this high level discussion that we say, first of all, at the outside, I want to say that although we say that these are high level discussions, but they seem like high level discussion, but all the points are coming from the flow of the local community, and then they are put into different jargons so as to make it very complicated for someone who's going to be impacted at the last mile of the chain. So what's working so far is, first of all, understanding why was there no inclusion, why is there still a discussion where it's very difficult for a local community to be there, or for different stakeholders to be part of this discussion. Is that again, we say that this is very technical in nature. So first of all, what is working as a youth for us is the capacity building, how to make this language very easy accessible for different kind of communities or youth around the world, or the different communities to be able to understand this in a simple language. This sounds very very technical or very difficult at the outside, but we generally take into this in the context, and we run a lot of capacity building sessions so that they can be part of it. Secondly, what is more important is that although you can be very much skilled or have the capacity, but you won't have the finance to be part of these processes, because to be in these meetings you need to have some access to resources, so then you can easily participate, or you should be part of those meetings, or you can go to COP but you cannot be part of those meetings which are actually deciding. So how to find that entry points, so that's very important. So finance, entry points, capacity buildings, all three things have been that's what we have been working on, and that's what actually has made the entire process more inclusive for different communities to be part of these high level discussions.
And Benjamin, for you, what are some of these entry points? Because in your organization in 1.5, I think an important aspect of your work is actually building capacities for youth, right?
Yeah.
So what are some entry points specifically in the case of a just energy transition and how this translates to communities, but also in general, so how to take more climate action and bring it forward to these discussions and bring them to the reality of people.
Yeah. Can I add something that actually you asked before?
Yes.
Well, thank you. Well, something that is gonna be the heart of this COP30, it will be adaptation, right? Well, in this new climate change conference, the country have to decide, okay, how we're gonna measure the success of adaptation. In mitigation, for example, we can measure in terms of like ton of CO2, right? Like how we advance or not on mitigation. Instead, in adaptation, we don't have indicators. And those indicators are the main topic actually of the climate conference this year. We have to decide, okay, which indicators or with which indicator we are going to measure the adaptation. The thing is, like last year, we had a set of 1,000 indicators. After the Bonn conference, the country decided to have 490 indicators. And the idea or the goal is to reach no more than 100. Actually, now in Morocco, if I'm not wrong, there were a technical meeting where they decide to have like around 100, or they have a proposal for 100. Why so difficult, and why now local community matters is because the adaptation in one community or territory is quite different, for example in Argentina, in Chile, than for example in Russia, or in Europe, in United States, or in India, or in Africa. Always depends on the context, on the vulnerability, because we have to understand that adaptation, it is like an equation. I am engineer, so I always love to see everything as like an equation. It's like, isn't like it's a formula between vulnerability. It's like how vulnerable you are, like in terms of like one impact, and how resilient, how is your resilience to survive to that impact. So then we have like the adaptation capacity, like the vulnerability or the risk, and then you have the resilience. So it's like we have to understand that the vulnerability is quite different and depends completely in of the local context, and also the risks. The risks are different also depending of the territory. So now for this COP, we have to bring, or we have to make more concrete that idea of that bottom up. It's like, okay, these are have these impacts, or these are the stories that are happening in the territories, and we can put it this actually on the climate negotiation. It's not like a mitigation that you can do it from the top down. No, now we are talking about adaptation, and we have to see, okay, this measure, these stories, these like impacts are happening in the territory. So these are the best indicators. But something that we are actually, there an agreement on this negotiation is like the adaptation capacity is quite local and depends on your local capacity, on your local reality, on your cultural, on your culture, on your economic capacity, like everything. It's not that you can decide, okay, just one indicator from the climate negotiation in a very like formal room with very formal people. No, have to be decided and defined by the people that like grassroots organization. So after to talk that, after to say that, and to talk about what you said, it's like, okay, this year the core of the negotiation is going to be adaptation, right? But also we're going to have a new evaluation of the NDCs, these climate national plans. And we are gonna see, okay, if these countries are gonna consider the outcomes of the global structure that was decided in COP28 in Dubai. That
Benjamin,
was,
just
yeah,
for those who don't know what NDCs are, can you explain that to us?
yeah. Okay, the global stock take, sorry, it is a document at the end. Well, everything in a documents are like, yeah, files. But this document that actually the first version was in COP28, that it was in Dubai in 2023. It was an evaluation of how has how has been our progress in the Paris Agreement. That means like how has been our progress to limit the global warming or the global temperature no more than 1.5, or the idea of 2.0 degrees. So it's like, okay, the country are doing something. How far are we from that goal? That in terms of mitigation. But then in adaptation, it is okay, we have to increase the resilience, the adaptation capacity of our country, of our people. So that document at the end is like an evaluation, how has been our progress, and what we have to do to be all again on track of the Paris Agreement goal, right? So it's what kind of like a set of recommendations. The idea on or why happened actually in 2023 is because then the country have the capacity or all the resources, the information of what they have to do to update their climate national plans. If we see like, if we say like in a more like friendly way, that are the NDCs, right? So what we are now waiting is to see, okay, if the NDCs, the climate and these national climate plans are including those recommendations, and those recommendations in terms of mitigation or energy, why or were like quite clear to say for first time in the history of the COP the responsibility of the fossil fuels. It was the first time that a COP document or cover decision included that we have to transition away. That term that is quite confused, because what does it mean transition away? But it's like, how do we transition away from fossil fuels, understanding that fossil fuel represent more like around 70% of greenhouse or the greenhouse gas emissions. So are like the main responsible, like like they have the responsibility of this climate change. So it's like, but it was the first time, and the idea or the concept that were pushing NGOs and civil society was like to phase out. But okay, then also the country decided to put transition away. But it was something that we have to consider, that it was not the best thing, but it was like, okay, something that we have to now to see is that transition away of fossil fuel to triple triple fly like the renewable capacity, to double side the energy efficiency. Sorry if my English now is not the best one, but it's so early here in Chile. And it's like, okay, we have to see is that like if those like goals or like new goals are included in the NDCs. So COP30 is going to be also opportunity to see the real ambitions of the country, and most important of the most responsible countries of the GHG, the greenhouse gas emissions. So it's going to be key in terms of energy, because now is the moment to implement, not to talk more about like cover decision, this big like documents with very like, I don't know how to say, but like very like beautiful words, but at the same time technical that you don't understand. No, it's like, okay, let's implement, and those implement are gonna be the indices.
Thank you so much for giving us your yeah, what you're going to be focusing on basically and following, and your key points at the upcoming COP30 in Brazil, which, like you said, and many are saying, will be and has to be the implementation COP, right? Alokita, what are these points for you? Oh, I'm sorry. I see that Brian Kithinji has been able to join us, so I will just quickly say hi to Brian and bring him into the conversation. If you can hear us, let me bring Brian in. Hi, Brian. Can you hear us?
Hi. So unfortunately, I was unable to join on time because a colleague got an accident, so we had to take them to hospital. But everything is fine. I'm really sorry, and my prayers with my colleague and everything. But there's something that Benjamin mentioned, because needs must, and we have to talk about this important conversation. Is that when you look at the structure of COPs, is that in as much as yes, the UNFCCC, which people meet for COPs based on that, is a binding document. You find that most of these resolutions are non-binding. So many governments, especially in the global north, do not implement. Like, for example, in 2015, developed countries agreed that they are going to give 100 billion dollars each year to developing countries who are most affected by climate change. But lo and behold, even with the loss and damage fund that my brother Benjamin mentioned was set up, still the contributions have been very, very minimal to address the issue. Another thing is that with the structure of COP, there's always a tendency of member states having a lot of power. And because you know that with the whole badging system, the green badge, blue badge, the red badge, and the power that member states hold, and you find that most of these governments, especially in the global south, are not representative of the people's interests. So that becomes a factor that if you're going to have government delegations, or in quotes, member state delegations taking decisions on behalf of the collective, but these governments are not representative of the people on the ground, then that becomes a problem. And we have seen so many instances like Equatorial Guinea with the deals that they have with Total, but the people who are there, they have never benefited, and they've always been complaining about the pollution of the Congo forest and the Congo basin and the Gulf Sea that borders Equatorial Guinea. Yet Total has signed deals with the government, and so the government that puts a blank check. And there's so many instances that you can point out. So that becomes also another issue. Another thing to talk about when focusing about policy and the discussion that we are having is that we need to move away, focus so much on the big COP for the climate, and also look at the other COPs where decisions are taken. And I give an example that I recently came to learn that there is a COP6 that will be happening on the Minamata Convention. So we are going to discuss mercury in the Minamata Convention. Let's say member states say that because mercury, to be honest, has to be phased out. But let's say they extend the phasing out period to 2050. It means there will be effects on the soil and the water, which you cannot probably climate although it's still part when you look at the entire ecosystem of human and environmental health. However, the decisions have been taken separately. And there's so many other instances we can look, even with agrochemicals, with the BRS crops. So this becomes a problem whereby decisions are taken in one side, but they do not cover everything. And then probably the last thing I would say is that we need also to move away from the focus on the big COPs and put a lot of emphasis on regional discussions, because I always say, like the famous saying that all politics is local. You will find that most of the countries within a certain region have a certain context and they understand it much better. So, for example, in the South American countries, that they're able to talk about the Amazon basin. They know the problems, the challenges they face. Which, if let's say that it was to be discussed in the bigger COP, yeah, Amazon may be discussed because it's the number one lung of the world. But let's say for the small island countries like the Papua New Guineas, the Seychelles, the Mauritius, you'll rarely find their agenda hitting the notes in these COPs. And probably one way to look at it is, how do we focus or decentralize the power of decision making to the regional areas, whereby countries who share the same context, the same challenges, are able to take a unified stand and they are able to be supported by the global community. That is one way I think we should look at reforming COP, because as a structure as it is now, there's a lot of representation from the small island countries and even global south countries that are quite minor. Like when you come to Africa, Kenya is a big thing. But how about Lesotho? How about Eswatini? When you go to Asia, how about the smaller countries like Nepal, which has Mount Everest and it's being affected? So we need to look at how do we decentralize power and have equal representation, but also equal power to take decision and equal support for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian, for jumping into the conversation. It's great to have your insights. And I also want to hear from the audience. I see people joining us from Malaysia, someone else on LinkedIn saying hi and harvesting the wisdom concentrated on ecosystem restoration. We have our friends at Yodo, Cameroon, joining from Kambe. Thank you all for joining us. So we are discussing, for those who are just joining us now, we're discussing what can be achieved through climate COPs, through the biodiversity COPs, through the land use UNCCT COPs, what can be achieved through these high-level discussions to actually have a positive impact on communities on the ground. Now, Alokita, I wanted to ask you something related to what Brian was saying on looking beyond the COPs. Where else do you find hope for actual climate action, for real change to happen on the ground? Where have you seen in your experience as a youth mobilizer, as an advocate, in joining also these UN-related conferences and spaces? Where else do you see hope for real change?
Yeah, so from my experience, the hope that I see and what I've seen from my past work, because I started working at the community level with NGOs, with civil society, with policy makers who are actually inclined towards working for the community or doing change at the local level. But what where I see the tapping point right now is the innovation. We talk a lot about innovation in other sectors, but generally the innovation in the climate sector is not being discussed a lot. And so, but in this COP, there is a hope, because there is a particular pillar which talks about the technology. So if innovation is discussed in other aspect, then why not discuss in the climate? And we as a youth are very much interested in these kind of innovations which can lead to the just transition. So yes, at the local level, I see the hopes in the civil society, in the NGOs, in policymakers, the local level political actors who are actually inclined towards bringing solutions from the communities, and how the discussions are also coming out from the local level. So the not just COP, we need to have more discussions at the local level, so that more regional voices can be put in these text or documents, and then we can took it forward to the higher level. So yeah, so I see three aspect of it. First is the innovation, and then how policies and the different discussions are going on at the regional level, and the third is how the political community within the countries or at the regional level are more willing to change the future, and how to push them, how to work with them as a youth also to bring change as the local level, because if nothing is coming out the top level, we need to innovate something at the local and the regional level.
What does innovation mean for you? Like, does it mean technology or just different ways of thinking? What does that mean for you, Alokita?
For me, innovation, I think first it starts with your our imagination. What I feel in the coming years that our imagination has been trapped into a real realm where we think the negative aspects of everything, but then we don't have a very very creative thinking where we can actually do the change. So the first aspect, the first step is of course the imagination, and this imagination has to be inculcated in youth, especially because I have been fed with the negative news and negative thinking that the future is doomed. But if the imagination and the foresight is built into us, where we can innovate, where we can bring the technology which can lead to just transition for us and also for everyone around us, that's the first step for me, and then comes the creation out of it. First is creativity and then the creation.
Wonderful. I really like that. And I would, before passing on the mic to Benjamin, I want to ask everyone, where do you see hope? Where do you think real change can happen on the ground? It doesn't have to be, yeah, just let us know in the chat. We love to read your comments. We're loving that this is getting super interactive. People are saying over LinkedIn, over Facebook, hi, and really enjoying this discussion. So hi back to everyone. So now over to you, Benjamin, if you want to chime in on anything that Alokita has just shared.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to answer also to that question specifically after that we had the very sad news that Jane Goddard just now are with us, but in other dimension, let's say. Um, I still remember that in 2000, in 2022, in a summit actually in Paris, I had the privilege to ask her actually she can how she keeps actually her hope alive, because she has seen like so many. I mean, the world that she saw when she was young, it is quite different to the current world, right, in terms of biodiversity. And every time that I heard her, she talked with like hope. So I ask her actually how she can keep that hope alive. And she answered me. Actually, I just posted that video again just like 1 week ago or something like that. And she smiled actually and told me, well, it's because I see people every single day trying to make a difference, especially young people. And that like actually like response, well, it was of course longer. It was like, yeah, 5 minutes, something like that. But like that moment just not stay with me, also reminded me that hope is not a feeling. It's like hope are not just promises. Hope comes from people, and it's a form of action. It's like when we see action, when we see people acting, we feel more inspired. And when we are more inspired, we feel more like hope at the end, right? So also something that remind me is like where I find hope, it is collaboration, not polarization. And that word, or those words actually, are quite important now, even nowadays, when we have leaders that try to polarize us. But we also have to understand there are like thousand or thousand, 100 millions of people like scientists, policymakers, indigenous leaders, young people that are working together, not like symbolically or just putting for a picture. No, they are like actually feeling this call of action and they are like implementing that. So it's like, and also trying to bring like our regional like experience, like in Latin America we try to do that, something like really beautiful. I gonna share like something like when you're abroad and when like you see other like Latin American friend, yeah, colleague, even when it is the first time that you meet, it's like we are Latin American and we feel like something like a kind of connection. So that connection we try to make, or to feel that connection with the world, right? It's like we are the inhabitants, we're just like passenger of this beautiful planet. It's like we have to feel also that connection. So in terms of like hope, I see hope when I say people acting and people connected. So please don't lose that connection, because more than in every single moment of of the history nowadays, today we need more connection than ever.
Thank you so much. And I love where this conversation is taking us. We are slowly nearing the end of our episode for today. So thank you so much, Benjamin, for sharing this such a positive message of unity and looking beyond the climate negotiations that we are going to be focusing on. So yeah, before we go into your final message, Alokita, and your final message, Benjamin, I want to ask you if you could see one concrete thing, one concrete result coming out of this year's COP30, what would it be? Let's start with you, Alokita. Give us a very quick overview of one thing you want to see coming out of this year's COP.
One thing that I want to see coming out of this COP is, of course, the more pressure on the implementation part of it. Of course, this COP is the COP of implementation, but we have to stick to our words. If this is the COP of implementation, then it has to be COP of implementation, and different negotiations should actually push towards that, because it's high time. We are just discussing, talking, but we need to act now.
Thank you. Now over to you, Benjamin. If you could see one thing coming out of this year's COP, what is it?
A set of good indicators for the global goal on adaptation. And if I can say a second, like a real mechanism to put that NCQG, that is the climate finance, like put it in action, because the outcome of COP29, it was not the best one, but we have to make reality that 1.3 million of climate finance for developing countries.
Wonderful. So we have 2 points from you, and implementation from Alokita, finance, and clear indicators. Yes.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so we are about to wrap up today's conversation. I would love to ask both of you any final messages, anything that you would like to share, anything that we might have missed or you would like to add to this conversation. Also, for anyone in the chat, you have time for one final question. If you want to ask something very specific to Benjamin or to Alokita or contribute to the conversation, write it in the chat now. So yeah, anything that you would like to share with us today, Alokita?
Yeah, so one of the concluding points that I want to give through this discussion is, like already discussed in the previous discussion, is that we have to keep the hope. All this seems very technical in nature, very aloof from when we are in the day-to-day life, but then we are going to impact by this. We are already impacted by this, so we have to take interest in this, no matter how much you like it or you're disgusted by this discussion. But we have to be there, and we have to demand what we want in the future, or what is already happening.
Wonderful. And before jumping into Benjamin's intervention, I would like to highlight a comment from Siti Subaila, Suot Hajat. Sorry if I mispronounced your name, joining from Facebook. And they said real change can happen when we are able to identify the real problems and challenges faced by communities. So looking at indicators, this might relate to that as well in some point. And they say, especially at the grassroots level, from there we can work together to find solutions while recognizing the potential of communities that can be developed into sustainable economic opportunities. That's also an important point, how to build a sustainable economy, whatever that might mean in the future. And they also highlight the importance of innovation, collaboration, so echoing much of what you both have already shared throughout the conversation. Now, over to you, Benjamin, for any final messages for everyone watching today.
Yeah, well, something that I would like to add is like now in November, in Belém, we will host more than a conference, more than a climate negotiation. It will host a region's voice, a global South voice from the Amazon, but also from the deserts, from the different reality of the region. We have to understand that Latin America also can put a lot of like tools and experience on the table to talk about. So it is gonna be a global South conference, and we have to make that idea a reality, but it's gonna depend on us. So let's make that
Absolutely.
phrase like a reality.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Benjamin. And yeah, with that, I want to close the conversation unless we have anything going on in the chat, any final messages there. Thank you so much for joining this discussion, for taking us from these sometimes inaccessible, complex world of climate negotiations into real change on the ground, into messages of hope, messages of community, of connection, of collaboration and innovation. So these are all things these are values and concepts that we can all understand and apply into our daily lives. So thank you so much to Alokita Ja, joining us from Berlin, and to Benjamin Carvajal, joining us from Chile, also to Brian, even if it was a short intervention from him. I'm so glad that he was able to make the time to join us as well and contribute such insightful comments to the convo. And of course, to everyone watching in the chat. We'll see you next month on our next episode of Talk Landscape. And before I leave, I want to invite everyone to dive deeper into these conversations, into what actual action on the ground might look like, how we can finance this, the work of communities that are protecting and restoring our planet, in 2 events where the GLF will be present at the COP30, not only in Belém, in Brazil, but also online. So join us at the GLF Climate Hybrid Conference happening on the 17th of November. You can register for free online and be inside these discussions happening from the COP. And also join us at the 8th Investment Case Symposium on the 18th of November, also happening both in Belém, in Brazil, and online for everyone to watch. We will post the links in the chat. And yeah, make sure to stay tuned. Sign up for free to these 2 events. Follow us on social media. Sign up to our newsletter so you don't miss any upcoming Talk Landscape episodes. And yeah, just stay connected with us. Thank you so much for joining, and see you next time. Bye.